Welcome to the State Fiscal Year 2024 VAWA Grant Management Workshop. I'm Kristen Woodhagner, the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, Grant Administrator with the Crime Victims Reparation Commission, or CVRC. The CVRC Grants Department also includes Bureau Chief Donna Richmond, VOCA Grant Administrator Lourdes McKenna, State Grant Administrator Maribel Baca, and Grant Program Specialists Nathan Furr and Jackie Mascarenas. We're excited to have you join us today to learn more about grant management. This workshop will cover the following topics: an overview of CVRC, your VAWA contract and special conditions, financial management including invoices, budget revisions, and your match requirements, grant management requirements like time and attendance, travel, contracts, downloads, and progress reporting, grant fraud, waste, and abuse, and civil rights. You can download the PowerPoint using the link in the description, and remember to complete the survey as a record of your attendance. CVRC requires the financial planner, the authorized individual, and the program manager to participate in this workshop. In 1981, the New Mexico legislature created the Crime Victims Reparation Commission as an agency led by a governor-appointed commission with 5 members to assist victims of violent crime. CVRC's mission is to ensure that victims of violent crime don't experience financial hardship because of their victimization. And our compensation department provides reimbursement for eligible expenses related to the crime, like funeral expenses, medical expenses, and loss of wages. We are the payer of last resort, meaning that we will only pay what is remaining after other sources of payment, such as health insurance, have been exhausted. The CVRC Grants Department also supports victims and their families by administering federal and state funds to support programs like yours throughout the state. We're committed to providing you with the support you need to be successful. We also assist your agencies in meeting your sub-grant requirements, such as reporting and invoicing, and we have a strong internal control system in place to demonstrate to the federal government that funds are used appropriately. We offer training, technical assistance, and funding to help our sub-grantees provide quality services to victims of crime. In fact, you may find any one of our grants department team members assisting you because we assign invoicing and reporting on a rotating basis. This ensures that no one person is always responsible for the same tasks, and each item is viewed by multiple people, which federal auditors appreciate because it improves compliance with grant conditions. Today, we're specifically talking about the federal funding that CVRC receives from 2 programs established in the Violence Against Women Act. The first is the Sexual Assault Services Formula Program, or SASP, which supports programs that provide direct services to victims of sexual violence. And the second is the Services Training Officers Prosecutors Formula Grant Program, or STOP, which supports programs addressing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. In February, CVRC issued a Request for Proposals, or RFP, for continuation and competitive applications for VAWA funds in compliance with the state of New Mexico's procurement regulations. A peer review committee of violence against women experts who are not receiving funds from our office reviewed and scored the applications using the criteria in the RFP. The committee then made recommendations to the CVRC Commission based on the scores and availability of funding. The recommendations were presented to the Commission on April 27, 2023 for preliminary approval. CVRC notified awardees and provided a preliminary award letter by email. The Commission gave final approval on May 25, 2023, and awardees were notified by email with their final award letter and contract. Subgrantees should maintain both the preliminary and final award letters on file for CVRC site visits and federal audits. Your preliminary award letter may have contained requests for information or revisions, such as an updated budget or corrected lobbying form. It also included information on the protest period. Between the preliminary award and the final award, CVRC supports awardees in meeting these special conditions to ensure that the funded projects meet the award's intent, especially with budgets and primary project components. Budgets should be realistic and not overinflate what can be accomplished with this funding, because CVRC needs to share accurate information with the Federal Office on Violence Against Women, or OVW, so they can know, for example, how many victims can be served by a part-time advocate in a rural community. Accurate data can also be leveraged to request additional funding. CVRC wants to ensure that these goals and objectives reflect what the funds can support and meaningfully address violence against women in the state. Your final award letter includes the amount awarded to your agency and the year of your continuation funding. CVRC awards VAWA subgrants on 4-year funding cycles that are contingent on maintaining good standing and submission of an annual application. Please remember that there is a 10% reduction in year 3 and an additional 10% reduction in year 4. Awards in year 4 will need to apply as a new applicant the next year to be considered for continued VAWA funding. Your final award letter includes the amount awarded to your agency and the year of your continuation funding. CVRC awards VAWA subgrants on 4-year funding cycles that are contingent on maintaining good standing and submission of an annual application. Please remember that there is a 10% reduction in year 3 and an additional 10% reduction in year 4. Awards in year 4 will need to apply as new applicants next year to be considered for continued VAWA funding. The final award letter also includes a request for your agency's EEOP certification and instructions for signing and submitting your subgrant contract. As part of the RFP process, CVRC reviewed all applicants' most recent audit reports in their entirety. Agencies with unfavorable audit reports, with material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that put them at risk, are provided with additional monitoring and technical assistance to ensure that we are responsible and accountable for the funding, that we're able to demonstrate our fiscal prudence to the federal government and auditors, and that we help these agencies develop the organizational capacity to stabilize. If there are additional monitoring requirements in your award letter, please make sure that the individuals responsible for meeting those requirements are aware. All STOP VAWA subgrantees are required to submit monthly invoices with support documentation, which the grant department reviews. We cannot process and reimburse for an invoice lacking required documentation. We'll discuss invoices in more detail later in this presentation. CVRC conducts in-person site visits with our subgrantees. If a site visit is requested, we will send the agency a pre-visit questionnaire to be completed prior to the visit. Next, we'll review your contract. I know it'll be tedious and it feels like we get more conditions every year, but this is important and you'll be expected to develop policies within your agency to adhere to these conditions. If you have not yet signed your contract, please do so and upload it to WebGrants at nmcvrcgrants.com. If you get an error when trying to upload your contract, try renaming the file with a shorter name. Please don't hesitate to ask us for assistance. Reimbursement or payment against invoices cannot be processed until a signed contract is in WebGrants, and the first invoice is due on August 10th. On the first page of your contract, you can find the Federal Award Program, STOP, SASP, or VOCA, the Federal Award Number, the amount of your award, and your award period, which is New Mexico State Fiscal Year 2024, beginning July 1st, 2023, and ending June 30th, 2024. It also reminds you that payment is due by reimbursement only. Please review all conditions listed in your contract. It is important to remain compliant because these conditions are required by the Code of Federal Regulations, the Violence Against Women Act, the Office on Violence Against Women, the conditions of the federal award, and state laws. When CVRC or federal auditors review programs, they are looking for compliance with these conditions. Now, we want to highlight some of these conditions. In Provision 4, on the first page of your contract, which is attached to your award letter, this agreement can be terminated by the parties just like any other contract. You have to maintain your records, and CVRC, the Department of Justice, DOJ, or the Office on Violence Against Women, OVW, can inspect them. You cannot transfer this award without CVRC approval. Any amendments must be submitted through WebGrants for approval, and we'll talk about how to do that later. And you must comply with equal opportunity employment laws. Other highlights are the primary project components that you submitted in your proposal will guide your scope of work. You must notify CVRC of all staff changes within 3 business days. And you must provide resumes of the project staff to CVRC. 10, your direct service staff must attend at least one CVRC training on victim compensation. And you can find the dates and links for these trainings on the CVRC website. cvrc.state.nm.us. You must also coordinate with other VAWA-funded programs and providers in your area. If you're providing direct services to victims, your agency agrees that you will inform all potentially eligible victims and assist them in filing for victim compensation and assist in their submission of their compensation. You also agree to notify and assist victims with VINE, the Automated Victim Notification System. If you would like more information on VINE, please reach out to our office and we can provide assistance. 16, you must post your grievance policies where they are easily seen. Failure to comply or providing false information may result in withholding funds, suspending or terminating the contract, legal action, or prosecution. Quarterly progress reports are due in web grants each quarter. The annual reports will be emailed to you, and we'll go into that in more detail later. You must let us know if an agency deems you to be high risk, and CVRC may add additional requirements to the funding. You must comply with applicable sections of 34 U.S. Code 12291B, including Section 13, which prohibits discrimination. We'll talk about this in more detail again later in the presentation. 28, 29, and 30, you agree to comply with the DOJ Financial Guide and Part 200 uniform requirements. You must report potentially duplicative funding to CVRC, and out-of-state travel must be approved by CVRC ahead of time. And you must ensure you're not co-mingling funds. So you have to have a really good accounting system to track all your funding. 32, you cannot supplant federal funds, meaning you can't redirect or reduce the state or local funds that you're receiving because you think the VAWA grant could cover that expense. That's called supplanting. Payment is by reimbursement only. We reimburse for expenses from the prior month. Invoices for expenditures are due to our office by the 10th of the month, or if our office is closed on the 10th of the month, like it's a holiday or a weekend, then it would be the business day before. Because of the state requirements in the end of the fiscal year, the June invoices will be due a little bit earlier on July 8th, 2024. There are requirements related to program income in 36. Very specific approval on training project budgets. And there's a federal limit on the consultancy rate in 37. At the top of the next page, promptly refer not only to the Department of Justice, but our office as well, if there's any credible evidence or actual or perceived fraud, waste, abuse, or misconduct, or if you suspect a program may be potentially discriminating against clients or is not able to provide assistance to clients. We want you to share these concerns with our office so that we can look into them, provide technical assistance if necessary, and prevent further harm. There's also more information about that in 47. If you're not in compliance, there can be consequences from CVRC or the federal government, including being deemed high risk and having additional conditions added to your grant. There are many provisions regarding civil rights and discrimination against employees and the people you're serving. We'll go into those in more detail again in just a little bit, but just briefly, applications were required to account for access needs for disabled participants, participants who have limited English proficiency, and deaf and hard of hearing participants. OVW also has rules about compromising victim safety and actually considers inaccessibility as compromising victim safety. And so this is something that CVRC does monitor. Under this condition, OVW also does not allow funding of anger management programs for offenders or pre-prosecution diversion projects. There are also specific requirements around confidentiality that continue into conditions 54, 55, and 61. If this award is funding a training program or training project, you must adhere to the training guidelines. There are guiding principles that are linked in your contract. This must be submitted to CVRC at least 30 days prior for review. If you have material or publications, they need the language here saying that it doesn't reflect the opinions of our office at CVRC or of the Department of Justice. 64 has additional requirements for subrecipients who are providing legal services. You must also ensure that human trafficking is not happening in your organization or at any level of the project, including those who you may have a sub-grant with, and suspected trafficking must be reported. And finally, the last condition is a prohibition on tort litigation, meaning that if you get sued, you cannot use VAWA funds to pay for litigation expenses. If you have any questions about any of these conditions, please reach out to our office. Quarterly reporting is submitted through web grants, and you'll receive an email reminder when it's time to submit. These are based on the annually required federal reporting requirements. Most of these questions will not apply to your agency, depending on your funded budget, but it's good to look through these reports so you know what kind of data you should be collecting, and you can start asking questions early. You can look at the quarterly reports in web grants now. To view the quarterly report, sign in at nmcvrcgrants.com. You'll enter your user ID and password, click sign in, and you'll notice this is a new system if you've used our past system. So this is what it will look like when you log in for your first invoice. Scroll down to your grants and click your VAWA grants. Scroll down to status reports. Then over here, you'll click the green button, add status report. Subtype, this would be your quarterly report. Give it a title. I'm just going to say test quarter 1. The first quarter will start July 1st. And it will go through September 30th. They're 3 months. And your quarterly report is due the 15th day of the month after the quarter ends. So July 15th through September would be October 15th. See, here's general information. That's what we just did. Click next. You'll go through the purpose areas just like you did on your application and select which of these apply. Everyone will do that. Next. You can see it didn't let me continue because I didn't actually edit or mark as complete. You'll have to answer every question before it lets you continue. Every required question. And then save form. Now I can mark it as complete. And it takes me back and there's a little check mark there. We'll go to function areas. Some of these function areas will apply to you and your project, some of them will not. And there's a lot here, so I'm not going to go through all of them. To go back in web grants, you click the back button in the system, not on your web browser. Next is victim services. And again, some of this will apply to you, some of it won't. But if you're a victim service provider, your project is providing services to victims, then you'll have to fill this piece out. So many of you will be doing this section. So I recommend you go in and familiarize yourself with what sections you need to fill out and what data you need to be collecting so you can answer questions now. Click back. Again, these are the different sections that may or may not apply to you. And you click next. Law enforcement. Mark is complete. Okay, now we're going to jump ahead to the narrative. And the narrative is required for everyone. And you'll just write about what needs you see, what has stopped program funding allowed you to do, and the effectiveness of your grant. These are mandatory in the 4th quarter only. Once all of these components have a green check mark, you'll see a submit button and you'll be able to submit your progress reports. Then when the 2023 annual report is due in early 2024, you'll be able to take the past 2 quarters that were in calendar year 2023 and then apply them to the annual report. The annual progress report will be sent through email and it'll be due early next year. And again, it's based on the calendar year. What is grant fraud? You have been awarded funds specifically to implement the project using the budget to meet the objectives and goals in your proposal. If your activities are within these boundaries and not subject to one of the conditions we just talked about in the contract, then you can take those actions without requesting additional permission. However, if you deviate from that, it is grant fraud. Fraud isn't always intentional. It can be accidental, a slippery slope of misuse and mismanagement of funds, or even well-intended. Even in these instances, there can be fiscal and even criminal consequences. So we want to help you mitigate those risks. An example is conflicts of interest in the procurement process. As a subgrantee receiving federal funds, you're supposed to make decisions free of undisclosed personal or organizational conflicts of interest, both in appearance and in fact. So perception matters. Purchasing goods or services or hiring an individual from a related party or a business associate without properly procuring, so not following your agency's hiring policies and procedures, and securing a trainer without soliciting for that trainer because you think that person is going to be the best trainer because you've known them for 20 years, but you didn't properly issue a request for a trainer or properly send out a proposal. In doing so, you selected a business associate for that position, and you failed to potentially see that there might be somebody else who's equally qualified to provide that and who might have been a better candidate. Vendor selections were not fair and transparent. Consultants can play an important part in your project, but they have to have a fair selection process. They must have reasonable rates and have specific verifiable work products. Lying or failing to report is unilaterally redirecting the use of funds. For example, you were getting money to do a subject A, and now you decide to change your programming to do subject B, which is unrelated. Instead of requesting prior permission to do that, you unilaterally made that decision. You may be able to fix this error. However, redirecting funds may make the expense ineligible under that pot of money, and it cannot be resolved. Failing to adequately account for transactions. You must be able to adequately account for transactions and represent the eligibility of funding. So keep good records of documentation related to transactions and expenditures. If you have a question about allowable costs, please reach out to our office. Fraud prevention strategies include examining your programs and your policies and procedures to identify fraud vulnerabilities. CVRC is available to review policies and procedures upon request. During a site visit, we will look at your policies and we can identify vulnerabilities and make recommendations based on other programs we've worked with to help create fraud prevention strategies and establish well-designed and tested systems of internal controls. For example, not having one person who opens the mail, reconciles the accounting system, deposits the checks, and writes all the checks for the agency. That's a lot of power in that one position. It is incredibly dangerous because it becomes difficult to identify conflicts of interest, to disclose them, and to ensure there's a fair and transparent, fully documented procurement process. Your procurement process should be administered across the agency, not just to the VAWA funded segments. Your agency should have proper procurement policies and procedures. If you have unrestricted funds that don't require a procurement, but your agency has a procurement policy, then you're violating that policy. It's a best practice for the entire agency to adhere to a procurement policy, because if federal auditors see that you're only properly procuring your federal funds and not being good stewards of other funds, they will tell you to look at the Code of Federal Regulations related to that. With regards to your VAWA awards, you can go to the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, guidelines and find the federal OVW definition of domestic violence, which is a pattern of abusive behavior. So VAWA-funded programs related to domestic violence have to be using this definition of domestic violence. All victim service providers using this award to provide direct services are not required to provide match, and some other subgrantees received a match waiver. However, all governmental subgrantees are required to provide a 25% match of the total budget for the Stop VAWA funded projects. If you're required to provide match and are not meeting that obligation, CVRC will not be able to release the funds. If you did receive Stop VAWA dollars from CVRC that were not properly matched, your agency would be contractually required to reimburse us. So for example, if you get $25,000 in an award, your match would be a little over $8,000. If you expend $20,000 of the stop funds, but only match with $3,000, you would have to pay back the funds that you didn't match, which would be about $11,000. So make sure that if you have a match requirement that you're meeting that match. Invoices are submitted through the grant management system web grants at nmcvrcgrants.com. Web Grants has recently been upgraded, so when you submit your July invoice, it'll look a little different than what you're used to, but the functionality will be the same. CVRC will post an overview of how to submit invoices in the new system later this week. Remember, your first invoice for July is due on August 10th, And invoices are submitted monthly with an accounting sheet and support documentation. If an invoice is submitted late, you may need to wait for reimbursement until the following month. Templates for the accounting sheet and time and activity sheet can be downloaded from our website under Documents to Download, and there is a link in the description of this video. CVRC staff will check the line items against your budget, your documentation, and what you have submitted in web grants. So please make sure all of those align. For example, make sure you have enough in your budget so that an expenditure will not cause one of your line items to go into the negative. Do the supporting time and attendance reports match the pay rate, hours, and staff that are in your budget? Do all the subtotals in web grants match the subtotals on the accounting sheets? If you need to adjust your budget, a budget revision request can also be submitted through web grants, and this will be covered in the web grants overview later this week as well. If you have questions when working on an invoice or considering a budget revision, please do not hesitate to contact the CVRC Grants Department. We're here to help you. To submit an invoice in web grants, go to Grants and then click the grant that you want to submit an invoice for. Click Invoices, add claim. It'll be for reimbursement. Your first invoice will be for July 1st through July 31st, and click Save Form. Now there's a check mark there for that component. Click Reimbursement. And now you'll see the budget from your proposal. This budget has two positions. One is vacant, one is filled. So we're going to go to Edit Reimbursement. Vacant, we're not going to have an expense there. Staff person. This will be their salary. And then we want to do it for the same staff person, their benefits. So, 200, save reimbursement. And now you'll see subtotals for expenses this period. These are the subtotals that you want to make sure match your other documents and match your accounting sheet. This is something that CVRC will look for when we're reviewing your invoices. So we'll mark as complete. Okay, takes me back here, invoice supporting documentation. This is where you would upload, you'd say add new attachment and upload a file for your timesheet, your receipts, any invoices from a contractor. You would mark as complete. Won't let me mark it because I don't have anything submitted. Go to next. Okay. Invoice advice. This is where you'll upload your accounting sheet. Please upload your accounting sheet as an Excel document. You can write notes in the margins if an explanation is needed for one of your expenditures. We recommend showing your work. Use formulas instead of just entering a number directly into a cell. That way the grants department staff can see what you were doing. When that's done, you can go back to your claims list. And these will all have check marks. And then you'll have a submit button. Please also remember to check the dates on the invoices that you're submitting on your accounting sheet to make sure that those are correct. If you need to make a budget revision, please wait to submit your invoice until after that revision has been submitted. To request a budget revision, you'll go back into web grants. You'll go to grants, click the grant that you want to revise the budget for. Scroll down to contract amendments, not budget. I know it's confusing. Contract amendments, add amendment. This will be a budget revision. Add title. Let's say there's a staff change. Let's say we filled that position. Okay, budget revision. Vacant advocate position filled. Now you'll enter the details of what your new budget will look like. You'll start with requested budget amendment, and you'll put in what the subtotals of each of these categories should be in your new budget. And scroll down. This budget narrative adjustment will be more detailed than what we've already written. So for example, this is a staff change. So I want to put the new staff person's name, how many hours a week they're working, 40 hours a week on VAWA. If we were doing a match, we would write the match here. So if they were doing 20 on VAWA, 20 on our match, we would write that. We'll put the rate. So we say $20 an hour. And any other details, of course, what their position is. They would be the victim advocate. If you're moving funds from one category to another, so let's say you had in-state travel, but you want to go to an out-of-state conference, you would write those details here. You'd write the information about the conference, where you're going, and you would specify we want to move this line item, the funds in this line item, from in-state to out-of-state. And scroll down. And this budget will be automatically generated. This is what your current budget is. And you want to double check that the totals here, sorry, not the totals here. You want to double check that the total program budget here, these ones, so your federal, your match, and your total, that matches what you have up here in your totals. So the totals for your requested budget amendment should match the totals in your current budget, even if your subcategories are changing. And then you'll add your documentation. So for our example, with our new staff coming in, we would want to add their resume. This is where you would add your budget amendment sheet that you can download on CVRC's website, and it's linked in the description. And then every time you make a change, you want to click Save Grid, Save Form. Go back to the amendment list. Then if I had submitted the documents, we would have a check there, and we would be able to submit here. If you have a contractual consultant, the contracts have a minimum of the following requirements: hourly rate of the contractor, number of hours, and description of services. It should have a beginning and an end date and should be signed by both parties. If you have an approved contractual consultant in your budget, make sure you submit a copy of that contract prior to execution to our office. Make sure that they adhere to the federal guidelines. Programs and projects that receive funding from our office must meaningfully collaborate with all the other systemic partners in your community that provide services to victims of crime, particularly law enforcement, the judiciary, prosecutors, and victim service providers. Really work at building those collaborative relationships to leverage the funds, but also leverage the resources that are available to victims of crime. Now we're going to briefly go through some of the civil rights compliances for subgrantees. This is one of your contractual requirements. If you receive federal funding, you have civil rights obligations. Some of the civil rights obligations are Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Safe Streets Act, the Victims of Crime Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination Act, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, and the various DOJ regulations on the equal treatment for faith-based organizations. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act states no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, national origin, shall be excluded from participation and denied the benefits in or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal funding. Under the Victims of Crime Act, no person on the grounds of race, color, religion, national origin, handicap, or sex can be discriminated against or denied access. Under the 2013 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, they took it even one step further. So no one on the basis of actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability shall be excluded. VAWA also explains that if sex segregation or sex-specific programming is necessary to the essential operation of a program, nothing in this paragraph shall prevent any such program or activity. But you would have to provide services comparable to those being excluded. Title 504 talks about individuals who are disabled with physical or mental disabilities that substantially limits one or more life activities, has a record of impairment or is regarded as having an impairment, those individuals are protected. Under the Rehabilitation Act, it also talks about the number of employees receiving funding and how much funding you would have to receive in order to have a compliance coordinator. The ADA is talking about individuals with physical and mental impairments, including the deaf and hard of hearing community, who are also protected under the limited English proficiency requirements. The Age Discrimination Act protects individuals from being denied services based upon age. And the Educational Amendment of 1972 talks about participation being denied in an educational program. The Educational Amendment of 1972 talks about participation being denied in an educational program. And the Equal Treatment of Faith-Based Programs talks about prohibiting discrimination against organizations on the basis of religion, and they define religion as any religious practice as well as belief, including severely held moral or ethical beliefs. The protected classes under all of these acts are race, color, national origin, religion, gender, disability, and age. Additionally, VAWA protects sexual orientation and gender identity. Any agency that receives VAWA funding is subject to these laws, not just the federally funded staff members or programs. Some examples of discrimination from the Office of Civil Rights are: a funded domestic violence clinic has a blanket policy of only providing services to female victims of domestic violence and not male victims. Male employees at a funded detention center sexually harassing female occupants. And culturally based sexual assault programs primarily designed to provide services to Hispanic individuals turn away non-Hispanic individuals seeking services. All of these would be considered discrimination and a violation of the conditions of your VAWA funding. As a CVRC funding recipient, you must provide reasonable accommodations for disabilities, in addition to ensuring reasonable access to individuals regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, or gender. And CVRC is required to monitor your organization's civil rights compliance. Again, we'll ask you about your policies and procedures, such as who do you report civil rights violations to? How do you train staff and volunteers on civil rights? How do you inform clients about filing a grievance? For example, if you receive a complaint, you must forward it to EEOC and the Office of Civil Rights. CVRC has clear policies and procedures that explain how an individual can complain directly to our office, how we will refer the complaint, and how we will acknowledge and train on the requirements related to the complaint. CVRC also has a 501 coordinator in our office to ensure programs meet the OCR requirements. We have grievance policies, limited English proficiency policies, statements that our programs are aware of these various civil rights compliance policies, and these assurances are in our contracts with our programs. One of your grant requirements is to download CVRC's civil rights policies from the Documents to Download section of our website. You can find the link to the website in the description of this video. You're also required to disseminate these policies appropriately throughout your organization. And your authorized official must email cvrc.grants@cvrc.nm.gov to say that you have received these policies. Before you close this video, please remember, complete the survey using the link in the description to document your attendance. And email the grants department at cvrc.grants@cvrc.nm.gov to let us know you attended. This is a requirement of the grants. You'll find a link to download this PowerPoint in the description as well. If you have any questions regarding any element of this presentation, please reach out to me, Kristen, directly at 505-709-0485 or kristen.woodhagner@cvrc.nm.gov. Thank you for attending this workshop. The CVRC Grants Department is available to answer any questions that you have. Please know that we are here to help organizations be successful in implementing your awards, so do not hesitate to reach out for assistance and answers. We thank all of you for the important work you do in supporting New Mexico's victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. and we wish you a successful fiscal year 2024.